Hey guys, Carla here from Ignite Your Learning again. I'm the founder and CEO of Ignite Your Learning, and we focus on doing one-on-one coaching with students to particularly just fill the gaps that they have, particularly in regards to preparation for exam conditions. So I just want to do a follow-up video from the previous one I did about how to know the difference between getting a 13 out of 20 and a 20 out of 20, and a big part of that being how you answer the question. So go and watch that one if you missed it. But I thought I might just do a bit of a follow-up on the difference between, like, once you're in those higher levels. So once you're getting, 17, 18 out of 20, or even the 16 to 18 range, which is still an extremely good mark. How do you then go from that to a 20 out of 20? And that's a really tricky question, especially for English, because there are things that can come into play there, such as some schools don't give out the 20 out of 20s because they just don't want students to feel like they're done, because if they're giving out 20 out of 20, a student might be like, oh, well, I've got all this down now. I don't need to really be doing any more study on this, and I don't need to improve anything about it, which can be problematic, because if you got a 20 out of 20 in term 4 of year 12, or even term 1 of year 12, and then you do exactly the same work that you did in then trials, that 20 out of 20 won't be worth a 20 out of 20 anymore. So that's something to really take note of, is that the quality and the expectation increases as the year goes on, because more people do more work. Well, everybody usually does more work. And so the standard goes up. So you need to make sure that even if you're in that really good band 6 range in term 4 of the previous year in year 12, that you are still working on and improving on what you're doing. Because look, and it's funny too, I often find that when students are, say, in May or June, right before or close to their trials, they might look back at the work they did in the previous year in term 4, and even if it got a really good mark, they're like, oh, what's that? That's really bad, because the standard of the quality of what they're writing has gone up, and that's really normal. How can that not be the case for 6 to 8 months of doing more practice and doing more work? So that's one thing to keep in mind. So there's the standard of the school. So kind of it'd be good to have an idea of whether your school actually likes to or does give out 19s or 20s out of 20, because there are certain schools, Sydney Grammar being one, for example, that they don't like giving those really, really high marks. Okay, so if you're getting a 17 or an 18 at a school like that, you're doing really, really well. So having that context is important. But just in general, when you're working towards getting that really, really high band, and you're looking at the difference between something like an 18 to a 20 out of 20, it really does. So going back to answering the question, it really depends on how well you've answered the question consistently throughout your entire essay. So if you've done like an 80% or 90% job of answering the question, where you've got it like a really good in-depth response throughout your whole introduction, your topic sentences are on point, you've linked all your points back to the question, your concluding statements of each paragraph go back to the question really well, but then you just forgot a conclusion. So a conclusion is an automatic, not having a conclusion is an automatic deduction of 2 marks. But let's say you just forgot about answering the question in the conclusion, that will cost you more marks when you're in the really higher levels than it will if you were going to be getting, say, 13 or 14 out of 20. So there are things that they take marks off in that really high band that they won't take marks off if you're getting a 12 or a 13 or a 14 out of 20. So that's where students sometimes get confused, because they start getting feedback in that really higher bands that they didn't get previously. So things like, your grammar needs to be on point, your spelling needs to be really good. And that seems really obvious for English, but, sometimes people just don't think it really means much. And maybe they had spelling mistakes, in the when they were getting lower marks, and nobody said anything to them. But now that they're getting the higher marks, teachers are picking up on that. So, you've really got like this, it's very, very very small things that will have those marks be deducted if you want to be getting into that very, very top band, that 18 to 20 out of 20. So again, and things that you may not have heard previously. So make sure that your spelling, your grammar, and the way that you answer your question is absolutely excellent and sustained in every single place that it needs to be. Another thing that you might want to look at as well is, making sure that your analysis is extremely good. So there is a big difference between analysis that will be getting, 17 or 18 out of 20 and analysis that will be getting, say, 20 out of 20. So the 20 out of 20s will be, sophisticated techniques, really good quotes, very detailed explanations about what the effect of those techniques are. And this is sort of true across the board, but again, like even they're going to be even more picky about it in those top bands. You can't just pick, say a technique, give the quote, but not really properly go into depth about how that technique actually has an effect. So a really good example of that is if someone uses alliteration. Now, if you're getting a band 6 or high band 6, you're not really even going to be using a technique like alliteration because it's a bit too basic. But let's say someone picked alliteration. They could make it sophisticated, but they need to be very good at the way that they explain how the alliteration has added to meaning in some way, right? So alliteration is one of those things that's easy to pick out because you've got the repetition of a consonant sound, but the actual linking of that back to the effect is a very different story. So making sure that all your techniques link back really well, and just the sophistication of the actual techniques that you pick, that is going to be quite different when you're in those high bands. Another thing that cannot be stressed enough, and this will tie into vocabulary, but also just the way you express your ideas, you need to be doing broader, like wider reading. You cannot be in a spot where you're going to have the level of sophistication they're looking for in that very, very top band if you're not doing things like doing wider reading of like academic articles. And I think reading those sorts of articles is so valuable just to understand how obviously more proficient writers are actually expressing ideas about particular texts. Now, like even as someone who's, obviously qualified English teacher, English degree, English honors, sometimes you read these articles and a lot of them don't really make that much sense. They're pretty confusing. The language is pretty convoluted, and that's fine. Don't worry about those bits that are really confusing. Stick to the bits that you do understand, and, see how you can start incorporating some of the vocabulary that they use into your actual responses or into your vernacular as well, because that will make a really big difference in terms of the way that you express your ideas and how sophisticated it is. So look, I'm not going to lie, it is really difficult to be getting a band 6 or especially a high band 6 in English. Like the amount of work, practice, ability to answer the question, the length you need to write is also longer. So you can actually get something like, you can get a high band 5 if you say have an essay that's under 1,000 words. So it could be maybe like 800 or 900 words, but what you write answers the question really, really well. Maybe not the most sophisticated thing ever. Like the analysis maybe, still has to be solid, but maybe not a reflection of the fact that you've read, 10 articles on that particular text or whatever. But, if you've answered the question really, really well, you can still get a really high band 5, even if your response is shorter. But for that upper level, the 18 to 20, you've got to have the content, in terms of like, we're looking at least 1,000 words. So you should always have at least a solid 3 ideas or three body paragraphs that are pretty developed, should be around 300 to 350 words each. Answers the question really well. Obviously what you write is really sophisticated. All of your I's are dotted and, T's are crossed and like spelling's on point. But yeah, doing that wider reading is really important, like thinking about the length. But I just want to kind of emphasize, sometimes people start trying to write something longer and have more content when they haven't really nailed answering the question. And that can actually be counterproductive, because when you're in the 18 to 20 range, you're working on different things than what you should be working on for the 13 to 17 range. And I would say the 13 to 17 range is more about how you answer the question than about the length of the content, or even in some cases, the quality of the content. It's more about how can you use the content and the techniques that you have to answer the question really well. And that is worth a lot. Okay. And that's what you should be focusing on in that range. Once you nail that range, like less content, but answer the question really well, then you can start looking at adding more content. Okay. But if you start trying to have more content without actually, nailing the question, it can be counterproductive. Like you could get less marks overall because you try to write too much and then you're not linking it to the question, and then you'll get a much lower mark than you could have otherwise gotten if you wrote less but answered the question well. So lot to kind of take in there, but hopefully that gives you an idea of, you know, what to focus on at the different stages that you're at with the marks that you're looking to get. And it is quite different when you are, at these different levels. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. If you do need any further help, we do offer one-on-one coaching. So, you know, you can contact us to book a trial lesson, and our teachers are really skilled at working with students on the different levels that they're at in terms of getting to that next level and understanding what's actually required. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful, and talk to you soon.